All right, we're gonna give it another minute and then we'll get started, but still hoping a couple more people will come. Right. Let's get started. This is um number 26 in our ongoing series on the fourth chapter of Bava Metzia. And we are going to be on pages 57b and 58a. We are now obviously not going to finish the chapter this year, but we're going to have class tonight. We'll have class next Monday, and then we're going to go on break for the summer. And when we come back in the late summer or the fall, we will pick up again. Okay, so this structure of our Gemara this evening is sort of repetitive. It's as if, the world heard Mindy last week saying that she really wanted to be able to see things more than once. And it has, tonight's Gemara delivers that because we have almost exactly the same thing several times. Not exactly the same thing, but you'll see. Okay, so we were back in our Mishnah, we had a list of things that specifically land, slaves, documents, and sanctified property that didn't fit in with a collection of different rules, that various things don't apply to them. And we started out to begin with by saying that there's no ona'ah for these things, which is how this list comes to be in this chapter, because our chapter is, at least this part of it, is about ona'ah. But there were a bunch of other things, a bunch of other rules that also didn't apply to that same list. And now we're going to go through them one at a time and derive how we know from the Torah that these things are not included in those laws. Okay, so here we are. Ein behen tashlumei kefil. One of the things they don't have is a double payment. A double payment is a payment that's made by a robber, a burglar, I'm sorry, somebody who sneaks into your house in the dark and takes stuff, right? A robber, somebody who confronts you personally, does not pay this. This is only sneaky theft results in a double payment. And the idea is that if you get caught and there are witnesses and you get convicted, then you have to pay back whatever you took and then pay it again. Right, so you stole, I don't know, a diamond ring worth $2,000. You have to give back the diamond ring and pay $2,000. Or in the event that the ring doesn't exist anymore, you have to pay $4,000. Okay, but that does not apply to some of the items on our list. And you might have been tempted to say that the reason why double payments do not apply to land is because it's actually not possible to steal land in a sneaky way. And it would be very tempting to say that, but that's actually not the derivation we're going to use. And I am a little bit mystified why that issue does not come up here, but well, let's read it. Okay, so Minahani Mili, how do we know this? Right, where in the Torah did we learn this? The Tana Rabbanan, as we learned in a Braita, Al Kol Davar Pesha Klal. Okay, so now we need to go to Sefer Shemot and see our psukim. We're gonna need to see. We're in Parshat Mishpatim, and we're gonna need to see these psukim intact before the Braita takes them apart. Let's see what the whole pasuk looks like. And all of the psukim we're going to look at tonight are in this one very tight little grouping in Parshat Mishpatim. Okay, so this comes at the end of the passage about an unpaid guardian having something stolen from them and being allowed to swear that it wasn't their fault rather than pay for it. At the very end of that passage, it says, I'm sorry, at the end of that passage, it says that if you do catch the thief pays double. Okay, then it says, Al kol davar pesha, al shor, al chamor, al seh, al salma, al kol aveda asher yomar ki hu zeh, ad ha'elohim yavod davar shnehem, asher yarshiun Elohim yishalem shnayim l're'eh. So on any issue of guilt, any matter of guilt, on an ox, a donkey, a sheep, clothing, or any lost thing about which you could say this is it, the thing of the two of them will come before the judges, and whoever the judges find guilty will pay double to the other person. Okay, so, and the Gemara is going to be very interested in this structure, and which we're going to have several times, where it had a general idea at the beginning, right? Any issue of guilt at the beginning, that sounds like a really big category. And then it had a list of specific examples, and then it goes back to being categorical about them. That structure is super important. Okay, so here we are in the Gemara. So the Braita said, Al kol davar pesha klal. So this statement at the beginning on any thing of guilt, that's a general statement. That's not about a specific case. Al shor, al chamor, al seh, al salma prat. And then the list of specific examples, those are specific. The ox and the donkey and the sheep and the clothing. And then Al kol aveda asher yomar chazar v'chalal. And then at the end it says any lost thing about which you could say this is it. That goes back to being a general thing. So we have two general ways of describing the category, something that relates to guilt and something that relates to lost objects. And in the middle, we had a list of examples. Okay, and you may remember from the Braita of Rabbi Yishmael that we say at the end of Birkot HaShachar in the morning, that if you have a klal and a prat and a klal, then we interpret it according to the prat. Okay, so that's what we're going to say. Klalu pratu klal yatadan el ke'ena prat. If you have a general word and then some specifics and then a general term, you interpret the whole thing as being only like the detailed things in the middle. Ma'aprat miforash dvar hamitaltel v'gufo mamon. Just as all of the detailed things are specified are something that is movable, and that is it's the thing itself is valuable, right? The Hebrew says its body is valuable. Some of these things are actually animals and have bodies, some of them not, but it doesn't matter. The language either way in Hebrew means that the thing itself is inherently valuable. So anything that's movable and is itself valuable, not something that represents value, but something that actually is valuable. So that's going to mean that in our passage is about who pays double. So you're not going to pay double it for land because it can't be moved. And you're not going to pay double for slaves because slaves are everywhere in the Torah connected to everywhere in halacha. They are connected to real estate. They function in commerce as if they were real estate. And yatsu shtarot she'af al pi shemitaltalin ein gufan mamon. And they also exclude documents because even though they can be moved, they are not themselves valuable. And we saw last week this sort of side note that if you sold documents not for the text that's written in them, right? You're not selling your debts, but you're actually selling the piece of parchment, right? You sell them to a perfumer to make into bottle stoppers for the little perfume bottles, then in fact that sale is subject to ona'ah, and presumably that kind of theft would be subject to a double payment too. Because stealing parchment should be subject to the double payment. It's just the stealing of the abstraction that is represented by the debt that's recorded on the document. That isn't subject to any of these things because it's not gufo mamon. It's not inherently valuable. The physical object isn't what represents the value. The value is an abstraction. Okay, that got us 3 out of 4 of the things on our list. We haven't dealt with the hekdesh yet, with the sanctified property. Hekdeshot, sanctified property, amar kra re'ehu. So 2 psukim earlier, at the beginning of this passage, it began with ki tein ish el re'ehu kesef o chelim lishmor. Right? If a person gives their fellow silver or vessels to watch, so that sounds like you have a person and you have their fellow. Those are both humans. Okay, so the Torah said that his friend, it could just as easily have said a person gives his friend. I think it probably really means the whole phrase. Re'ehu v'lo hekdesh, right? That's when you're having a financial interaction with another human being. This law applies, but not if you're having a financial interaction with the temple treasure. Because that is a corporate being, or because that is God. I'm actually not sure which one, but either way, it's not a human. Okay, v'lo tashlumei arba'a v'chamisha. That's the next phrase in the Mishnah. The next thing the Mishnah said that these things are not subject to is payments of 4 or 5. Now, 4 and 5 are a sort of a special case of the double payment situation. If you have a case where you would pay a double payment for stealing something, and what you stole is a cow or a sheep, and you either sold the cow or the sheep or you killed it, then instead of paying double, you pay 4 sheep for a sheep and 5 cows for a cow. But it is, as I said, it's a subset of the double payment. It has all of the same limitations apply to it. Okay, so my Tama, why not? Notice this is a different kind of question. The last one was Menahani Mili. From where in the Torah do we know this? This is my Tama, why, which usually asks for logic as opposed to a Torah derivation. Tashlumei arba v'chamisha amra Rachmana. God said payments of 4 and 5. V'lo tashlumei shlosha ve'arba'a. The Torah didn't say payments of 3 and 4. So that just seems to mean if you didn't pay a double payment, right, then we can't get to 4 and 5 without the second. So suppose you stole a suppose it's going to need to be a cow or a sheep for this to be relevant. So it's going to have to be sanctified property. The other things aren't going to work. Suppose you stole a sanctified cow, a cow that belongs to the Beit HaMikdash. So under normal circumstances, if you stole it from a human and you killed it and you ate it, you'd owe back 5 cows. But in this case, because if it had been, you had not killed it or eaten it, you would not owe a second cow because there's no double payment. So we can't get to the 4 and 5 without going through the double. The 4 and 5 only applies to things where the double happens. And so it seems to be that they think that, in fact, if we did try to impose the 4 and 5, we would say, well, you paid the first payment. The second payment you don't pay because there's no double payment. Now you would pay the third and the fourth and the fifth. And they're like, but wait a minute, that only adds up to 4 counts. That seems to be the logical problem we're coming to. But in any case, because there's no double payment, there's also no 4 and 5. Okay. That was sort of almost a side note. because it is a case that really only applies to live cows and sheep, which can't be documents, land, or slaves. So it's mostly irrelevant here anyway. Okay. Shomer chiname no nishba. So the next item in the Mishnah was that an unpaid guardian, somebody who's taking care of stuff for free, does not have to swear about these things. So ordinarily, if somebody is taking care of somebody else's belongings without payment, just as a favor for them, and something happens to the stuff that might have been preventable, but wasn't a result of negligence or fault on the part of the guardian. For example, you put it with all of your stuff. You took as good care of it as you did of your stuff. Maybe you could have taken better care, but you took normal care of it. You went to sleep and your house was burglarized and it was stolen. Right. So if for a paid guard, that might not be good enough. I didn't pay you to go to sleep while you were watching my stuff. But for a person who's doing you a favor, treating it like your own belongings is good enough. And that person would ordinarily just take an oath that it wasn't their fault and that they didn't use it, because otherwise they're not an unpaid guard. And they would just move on. In this case, apparently, you not only don't have to pay, but you also don't have to swear. There seems to be some argument among later people about whether, in fact, you actually have to assure the other person without an oath that it's not your fault, whether if the other person brings proof that it is your fault, then what happens, right? There may be complications, but there's some kind of case where if it had not been the items on this list, you would have sworn, but because it is the items on this list, you don't swear. Okay, Menahani Mili. How do we know this from the Torah? Okay, so now we are going to the that is a mistake, and I thought I had fixed it. It should just say in the citation there, it should just say Shmot 22:6. The 9 is an error. I am pretty sure. Yeah, the 9 is an error. I'm sorry. It should just be a 6. Okay, so Shmot 22:6 is like this. If a person gives his friend silver or vessels to watch, and you'll recognize this because I read this pasuk about 10 minutes ago, and it was stolen, whatever it is that he was watching was stolen from the house of the person who's watching. If the thief is found, then he will pay double. And now we need the next pasuk, which they're not going to quote, but it's necessary in order for you to know what we're setting up. If the thief is not found, then the homeowner, which is the guardian, will come close to the judges and swear that he didn't send his hand against his fellow's stuff, or that it's not his fault. Okay, but you're only going to swear in the cases that were in verse 6, where a person gave his friend silver or vessels to watch. Okay, so now we're going to play the same game we did before with the klal upratu klal. So the first piece says ki yitain ish el re'ehu. That's a klal. If a person gives to their friend, sounds like it could be about anything. Kesef ochelim, silver or vessels, those are examples, so that's specific. V'gunav mi beit ha'ish, and then it was stolen from the house of the guy. Chazar v'chalal, it went back to being general. And so we have a klal upratu klal. It was general, and then it gave us specific examples, and then it was general again. So the whole case has to be restricted to the kinds of cases that are similar to the examples. So just like the specific examples were explained as something which is movable and is inherently valuable, right? If you have silver is kind of our ultimate example of something which is inherently valuable, which you have to buy the cultural assumptions behind that, but that certainly is the cultural assumption we're making. And vessels are useful, right? They may also have symbolic value, but they certainly have literal, actual value. You can use them for stuff. Okay, so and these are sort of the classic things that are small enough to move around. So these are movable objects that are inherently valuable. Yatsu karkaot she'enan metaltalin. So just like before, once you require it to be a movable, valuable object, you outgo the land because that's not movable. Yatsu avadim shehukshu lekarkaot, and the slaves go out the same way as last time because they're always the same as land. Yatsu shtarot she'afal pisha mitaltalin en gufan mamon, and the documents are excluded because even though they are movable, they're not inherently valuable, or at least if you're selling them for the purpose of transferring the debt that's recorded in them, they're not inherently valuable. And the document says that I owe my mortgage company $250,000, but the piece of paper is not worth $250,000, right? It's the loan that's worth $250,000, and that's an abstraction. The piece of paper might be worth pennies, and if you're paying pennies for the piece of paper, so then okay, fine, it's inherently valuable. But if that's not what you're buying, then it's not. Heck, they showed the sanctified property don't really fit in here because the truth is that most sanctified property is movable and inherently valuable. So that's going to get excluded differently. It gets excluded the same way as we did last time. Amar kra re'ehu, the Torah said you gave it to your friend. And your friend is a human being. Re'ehu v'lo shel hekdesh. Right? It is only applies to transactions between humans, not transactions between people and the temple treasury. And again, I am just as unsure as before, whether that's because the temple treasury is corporate or whether it's because it's divine. I don't know what would happen with a secular corporation. Okay. Nosei sachar, eino mishalim. So our next example was in the cases where an unpaid guard would swear, that is to say, in cases of preventable but not negligent damage, like theft or loss of the kind that happens even though you take normal care of the stuff. In those cases, a paid guard pays. If I pay you to take care of my stuff, and then you go to sleep and your house is burglarized and my stuff is stolen, well, that's what you were supposed to be preventing and you didn't, so now you need to pay me for it. But in those cases, if it's the items on this list, if it's land, if it's documents, if it's slaves, or if it is sanctified property, the paid guard does not pay up. Now that seems kind of strange, but presumably if you can prove that it's their fault, that might be different. But there is, in whatever kind of case we weren't making the unpaid guardian swear, we're also not making the paid guardian pay. Okay, so the Gemara wants to know menahani mili. So where do I know that from? Now we are going to Shemot 22:9, and that is probably how the typo got into the document higher up when it said 6 and 9 instead of just 9, for which I apologize. And this is the next case in the parsha. It says ki tein ish el re'ehu chamor o shor oseh v'chol behema lishmor. If a man gives his friend a donkey or an ox or a sheep or any animal to guard, umet o nishbar o nishba ein ro'eh, and while in the care of the other person, it died or it was broken. It got badly injured, or it was captured in war and nobody saw, right? There are no witnesses. Then Shuvat Hashem tiyeh bein shnehem im lo shalach yado b'mlechet re'ehu v'lakach ba'alav v'lo yishalem. Then an oath of God will be between the two of them that he didn't send his hand against his fellow stuff, and the owner will accept the oath and the guardian won't pay. V'im ganov yiganev me'imo, but if it was stolen, right, rather than dying of natural causes or being captured in war by an invading army, right? Those are not preventable causes. At least they're not things that could be prevented by this specific paid guard. But if instead it was stolen from him, which, as I said, is theoretically preventable, yishalem l'ba'alav, then the guardian pays the owner. And so what we're trying to derive is that this passage doesn't apply, or this passage, which ended with, if it's stolen, then you pay the owner, doesn't apply to our items. And we had at the beginning, Kitain ish el re'ehu, when a person gives his friend, that's general, doesn't say what he gave. Chamor or oshor oseh prat, and then we had this list of examples: a donkey or an ox or a sheep. Those are specifics. V'chol behema lishmor, or any animal to watch. That sounds more general. Again, that's not a specific thing. Chazar v'chalal, that was returned to being general. Klalu pratu klal yatadan enakena prat, and we have, as usual, our rule that if you had a generality and then you have examples and then you have a generality, that the law only applies to things that are similar to the examples. Just as the examples that it gave are things that are inherently valuable and movable. So that, sorry, af kol davar mitaltel v'gufo mamon. So likewise, this law that you have to pay if you're paid to watch something and then it's stolen, that law only applies if the thing is movable and inherently valuable. That lets out land. Yatsu karkaot she'ena mitaltelin, because land is not movable. Yatsu avadim shehukshu lekarkaot, and it also excludes slaves, because slaves are always go with land. Yatsu shtarot she'afal pisha mitaltelin ein gufan mamon, and it excludes documents, because even though they're portable, they are not inherently valuable, or at least they're not inherently valuable in the amounts of money you're paying for them. And hekteshot, as usual, we're going to have to learn differently. Sanctified property, amar krabre ehu. So at the beginning, we said a person gives his friend. It said his friend. Re'ehu v'lo shel hekdesh. That means that this whole law only applies if you give something to another human being, not to the temple treasury. Okay, so now we're going to revisit the last two cases, and we're quoting again the bit of Mishnah from 2 bits of Mishnah ago, but this is actually the challenge we're going to bring now. It's not clear which piece of the Mishnah it's on. The Gemara is going to flip-flop about which piece of the Mishnah they're challenging. Either way, let's see. It is about guardianship for sanctified property and whether you have to pay or swear. So let's see what happens here. Uramin. So we're going to compare our Mishnah here in Bava Metzia with another Mishnah in Masechet Shkalim. Masechet Shkalim is about shekels, not surprisingly. Shekels are, in the context of Mishnah, shekels are the coins that everybody has to give every year for that adult men have to give every year as their sort of tax to pay for public sacrifices. In fact, actually, the tax is half a shekel, but in order to speak more fluently, we usually call them shkalim, but they're half shekels. In any case, so the Masechet Shkalim deals with what happens when people send these shkalim in various different ways, and what happens to them in the Beit HaMikdash. The thing that we need to know for our purposes here is that when the shkalim arrive in the Beit HaMikdash, they're kind of dumped in this storeroom until you get to just before Pesach. Pesach is the beginning of the new tax year, when you start using this year's shkalim for the sacrifices, and you can no longer use last year's shkalim. There's a whole to-do in the Mishnah and the Gemara about what you do with the remainder of last year's money, but that's not our issue right now. And in order to start paying for this year's sacrifices with this year's tax money, they take these 3 boxes and they carry them to the storeroom, and there's this whole ceremony of filling the boxes with money from the storeroom and then bringing them out to where the Kohanim are going to use the money to pay for the sacrifices. And when they do that, there's a declaration that the money is being taken from the storeroom, not just from the money that's actually in the storeroom, but from all of the money that's on its way coming, and in fact, even all of the money that hasn't even been donated yet. so that the people who are late getting their money in still get credit for having helped bring the sacrifices. But what that does, in effect, is that from the moment when they start shoveling the coins into those 3 boxes and then carry them out of the storeroom, all of the shekels that anyone is going to give anywhere are already sanctified, and they already belong to the temple treasury. They don't belong to you anymore, even if they're like, in your pants pocket. Okay, now let's see this mission. B'nei ha'ir sheshalchu et shkalehem v'nignevu o she'avdu. So we've got a population of people in some city which is far away from Yerushalayim, and they collected all of their shekels, all of their half shekels, and bundled them up together and sent them off to Jerusalem with an agent, with somebody who they were trusting to deliver the money. And then the money got lost or stolen. Not apparently the fault of the agent, but it's not that the agents embezzled the money. That would be a whole different problem. It seems like somebody else came and stole the money, or they were lost even though they were trying not to lose it in whatever responsible way we would expect. Okay. If the money the shekels have already been taken out in those boxes from the storeroom, then the agent that lost the money or had the money stolen from them swear to the temple treasurers. Doesn't say what they swear about, doesn't say why they swear. We'll have to deal with that later. The imlav, and if the money has not yet been taken out of the storehouse, then nishba'in livnei ha'ir. They swear instead to the members of the city. Okay, so uvnei ha'ir shoklin acharim tachtehem, and then the people from the original city have to send new money. Nimtzeu o shehachzirun ganavim. If the money is then, the original shekels are then found, or the thieves gave them back. Elu ve'elu shkalim hem. They're both shekels, right? The original money was sanctified. The new money was sanctified. You can't get any of it back. It's over. Ve'ein olim lahem l'shana haba. And it doesn't even count for next year. You've just given twice what you owe, and there's nothing you can do about it, except presumably find a better agent for next year or bring the money yourself next year, right? I think there's a little bit of an incentive here to make sure your money doesn't get lost on the way to Jerusalem. Okay, but we have a little bit of a problem here, because our Mishnah here in Bava Metzia said that one of the things that doesn't happen about about sanctified property is that guardians don't swear about it. But it seems here to have just said that either way, whether or not the stuff has already been transferred to the temple treasury by fetching the money from the storeroom, either way, these guys are going to have to swear to somebody. So that doesn't sound like it's consistent with our Mishnah. So now we're going to get a bunch of suggestions for how to smooth this over, how to make the two Mishnahs agree with each other. We could, in theory, just say that the Mishnayot disagree with each other, but we would prefer not to do that if we have a choice. When you have unassigned opinions in two different Mishnahs, if at all possible, we would like to make them consistent with each other. Okay, so Shmuel says, Amar Shmuel, Hacha benosei sachar askinan v'nishba'in litol schara. Shmuel says, well, maybe the oath that they're taking, either to the people from the city or to the temple treasurers, maybe that oath isn't an oath about not having to pay for the stuff. Maybe of course, they're not going to have to pay because this was sanctified property, and you don't have to swear or pay if you have sanctified property stolen from you. But maybe they were supposed to get paid for schlepping our shekels to Jerusalem, and they're taking this oath in order to get paid, because in order for them not to have to pay, fine, we say it's sanctified property, okay, like we understand that the rules are different and we can't hold you responsible. But if you want me to pay you for a job you didn't do, you might have to actually swear that you did the job and you tried. So Shmuel is suggesting that that's the kind of oath this is, and it's not. It's a different kind of oath than the oath that our Mishnah is talking about. But the Gemara doesn't like that because ihachi nishba'in legizbarim livnei ha'ir mibayel. So remember that this Mishnah said that half the time, if the shekels have already been taken out of the storeroom, then the oath is made to the temple treasurers. But for Shmuel to make sense, the oath has to be taken to whoever's supposed to pay you. And that presumably is the people who hired you, which presumably is the people of the city, right? So it doesn't fit in to say that sometimes they swear to the people and sometimes they swear to the temple treasurers if what they're trying to do is get paid by their employers. Okay, so we rejected Shmuel, moving along. Amar Rabba. Rabba has a different idea. Nishba'in livnei ha'ir b'ma'amad gizbarim. Maybe they're really swearing to the people in front of the treasurers, right? Maybe both when it says they swear to the people and when it says they swear to the treasurers. Really, they're swearing to the people. It's just in the second case, we require the treasurers to be present. Because the people of the city are concerned that the temple treasurers will suspect them of not having tried to send the money in a timely fashion. And so they want that, at the very least, they want to be satisfied that the agents will tell the temple treasurers in front of them that it was not the fault of the people of the city. They did, in fact, try to send their money. Okay. Ve'inami, or alternatively, alternatively, maybe the reason why they swear in front of both the temple treasurers and the people who sent them is because they don't want the people to start spreading rumors that they're not very good guardians of money, that they're negligent. And so it's in the best interest of the guard, not that they're not going to lose anything otherwise. It's not about whether they're going to get paid, and it's not about whether they have to pay money, but it's better for their reputation if they get to swear to what happened in front of all of the people who might otherwise think ill of them. Okay, maybe. Problem is that veha nignevu osha avduktani. Problem is that Rabba's theory depends on the guardians being able to swear that in fact they didn't do anything wrong, right? That's what's going to rescue their reputation. If they're stuck standing there swearing that, well, I didn't do a very good job, that this is not helpful to their reputation. It's not helpful to them at all. So it must be, if we think it's going to fix their reputational problem, then it must be that what they're saying is that we did it right. But the Mishnah said it was stolen or lost. That doesn't sound like they did their job, especially if they were meant to have been paid guardians. So Vishomer Sachar Bigneva Aveda Chayiv, we hold a paid guard responsible. We should certainly at least hold them responsible enough that we would say they didn't do a very good job. Even if we're not going to make them pay, even if we're not going to make them swear, we should at the very least not be announcing publicly that they did their job correctly. Right? That seems over the top. And also, even if you're going to push me to say that they shouldn't have to pay because this is sanctified property and the rules don't apply here, agraihu miha lafsed, and they should at the very least lose their payment if they didn't do the job, right? If I pay you to get my money to the bank, we could argue about whether you're responsible for replacing the money if you lose it. But if you didn't take it to the bank, at the very least, I shouldn't have to pay you for taking it to the bank because you didn't do it. Right? So these agents, the Gemara is feeling like the suggestion that Shmuel made that they want to be paid isn't going to fly because they shouldn't get paid if they did a bad job. And the suggestion that Rabba made that they should be able to protect their reputation isn't going to fly because, in fact, their reputation should be damaged because they did a terrible job. So either way, we don't really like either of these things. So Rabba now offers another detail. Amar Rabba nignevu belistin mizuyin avdu shetav asfinato bayam. So Rabba says, well, maybe it was stolen and it was lost doesn't mean what it usually means. Usually stolen and lost means the kind of theft and loss that a paid guard is supposed to be able to prevent, and that in fact you're paying them to prevent. But maybe here it has a different meaning, and maybe here it means, when it says stolen, it means by armed robbers of the very scary and powerful sort that we would not expect anyone to stand up to, right? You didn't pay the guy enough to risk his life for your stuff. And maybe when it said lost, it meant, well, the ship sank, right? Which is not, as again, something that the Guardian could have prevented from happening, right? That you can't stop the ship from sinking. You could, stop your pocket from having holes in it that the money falls through. Like that might be in your power, but you can't stop ships from sinking.
So if the ship
Yeah.
sank, how come the Guardian didn't sink?
So it could be that the ship sank and the Guardian knows how to swim, right? It doesn't, not, people do survive shipwrecks sometimes. Especially if they're close to shore, or for that matter, if it's on a river or not in the ocean. But that's what I got. I think it's gonna have to be something like that. So that might repair Rabba's position, right? That the reason that they're swearing is to avoid damage to their reputation, right? Then they get up there and they say, look, it was this terrible storm and there was nothing I could do and I barely escaped by holding on to a piece of driftwood for 3 days while I floated to shore. Whatever it is, they tell the story, everyone feels sorry for them, and now we know that they weren't terrible at their job. I don't know that this is really going to rescue Shmuel's position. Even if it totally wasn't their fault, I'm still not sure we're paying them for this, but maybe. I don't know. There is a story 2 chapters ahead of us. I think in chapter 6, although it might be in chapter 7, in which, in fact, somebody makes a litigant in court pay the people who were carrying his wine barrels across town, even though they dropped the wine barrels and smashed them and there's no wine. And he does make him pay them for their work anyway. But my impression is there that was sort of an extra legal thing where he felt like that was just what these people needed to have happen out of charity, not that he actually thought that was the correct legal result. But I'm not sure about that. Okay. But Rabbi Yochanan says, Hamani, who is this? So who could be the author of our Mishnah then, if it's true that it's about that it's I'm sorry, Rabbi Yochanan is offering an alternative, right? Rabba was explaining how it's compatible with the main position in our Mishnah, because it's an oath that's not about the money itself. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, I have a different solution to suggest. Maybe, in fact, this is absolutely talking about a normal Shvuat HaShomrim, a normal oath taken by a guardian, but you're connecting it with the wrong part of our Mishnah. Maybe it's Rabbi Shimon. We had Rabbi Shimon at the end of our Mishnah, and he said, Kadshim shechayav ba'achrayutan yesh lahem ona'av nishba'in alehem. Rabbi Shimon said, sanctified property that you would have to replace if it got damaged has ona'ah, and one does swear about it, right? It's to that extent, it's your normal property. Because if this cow dies, you're going to have to bring another cow. So part of the definition of your property is that if it dies, you lose money, right? Like that's part of the definition of owning something. And Rabbi Shimon says, if that's true about the sanctified property, then it's yours enough that it operates in all of the normal financial circles as if it was ordinary secular property. So maybe this is him. And in fact, a shekel at the time when you first donate it is money that you would have to replace. In fact, look at the Mishnah. It says, since they got stolen or lost, that the people are going to have to send new ones. right? That seems to fit our definition. Although it's ambiguous in the Mishnah, if we go back up here, it's ambiguous whether when it says they need to send new shekels to replace them, whether that's talking about the second option where the money has not yet been taken out of the storeroom, or whether it's talking about both the second option and the first option. Either way, we're gonna now, I think, assert that that's only talking about the second option. You only have to replace it if the Kohanim have not yet started removing money from the storeroom. Okay, so because the Gemara says hatinach ad shelo nitra matruma, that works. That theory that this is Rabbi Shimon, and the reason you're swearing is that you'd have to replace it if it got lost until the shekels are taken from the storeroom. But misha nitra truma, once that's happened, at that point the money is completely the property of the Beit HaMikdash. It no longer belongs to you at all. And if something happens to it, you don't have to replace it. And so at that point, you should not have to swear about it. Titania, tormim al ha'avud val ha'gabui val ha'tid ligavot, right? So that when the Braita says that when they take the money out of the storeroom, they take them from shekels that are lost and shekels that are collected and shekels that will be collected in the future, right? Even if they're not present. So that at that moment then gathers all of the shekels in all of those categories into the property of the Beit HaMikdash. And our Mishnah said that in the case where the truma was taken already from the shekels, the agent would swear to the temple treasurer. It doesn't say in a case where it was taken already, the agent doesn't need to swear at all, which is what would seem to make sense if you're Rabbi Shimon. So Ella Amar Rabbi Elazar says, never mind, that it nix all the stuff that we just said. We can't make this compatible with our Mishnah and Bava Metzia if it has anything to do with normal commerce. So it doesn't. It's just a separate thing. Shvuazo takanat chachamim, this oath that the agents have to take if they show up in Yerushalayim without the coins that they were supposed to bring, is a decree of the rabbis. Shelo yu b'nei adam mizalzalim behekdeshot, so that people shouldn't treat sanctified property lightly, right? So we want, when the agent is on their way from Sharon, Massachusetts to Jerusalem with a suitcase full of silver coins, we want them to hold on to that suitcase as if they lose it, they're going to have to explain to a higher power what happened to it. And in order to get them to give it that kind of attention, we say, well, if you get to Jerusalem and you don't have the suitcase, you're going to have to take an oath in front of the Kohanim explaining what happened to it. Or you're going to have to go back to Sharon and explain to the people there what happened to it, depending on the timing. But either way, you're going to have to swear to what happened to it. And people don't like to take oaths. People take oaths really seriously. You're going to take better care of the stuff if you know that you're going to be held to account. Okay, that is what I have for this evening. Are there questions? Okay, I'm sorry. I think I may have said a lot of stuff a little too fast. But if you come up with questions, you're welcome to email them to me.
No, there's a lot there.
There is a lot. Okay, so I will see you one more time next week. And also have a Chag Sameach and a Shabbat Shalom, and I will see you next Monday. Good night.
Thank you. Good
Thank
night.
you.